Praise the Lord, everyone. Pastor KJ here, praying again that you are encouraged and walking in destiny and purpose and doing exactly what God needs you to do to fulfill that destiny and purpose in your life. Remember that you are very important in this world, and there's someone depending on your testimony of overcoming, your testimony of how you got through it, and you have a gift that is going to bless many people in this world. So don't worry about your struggles. You're going to be fine, okay? I want to run back to Matthew chapter 5. Remember, we talked about recognizing dogs and swine, and in that discourse between Matthew chapter 5 and chapter 7 that Jesus talked, and I want to focus on Matthew chapter 5 verse 13, and it says, "Ye are the salt of the earth, but if the salt have lost his savor," not his savor, "wherewith shall it be salted? It is henceforth good for nothing but to be cast out and to be trodden under foot of men." It was interesting to me because I had to look at the word his. Little teaching here real quick. There were so many Bibles that King James in 1600 commissioned a group of scholars to condense all the different Bibles. There were like between 14 and 20 different Bibles that were used, condensed them into one. 10 years later, that's why it's called the 1611 version, he approved the Bible that they wrote and that they came up with in Old English, which is the King James version that we use today. In the translation, with all of the manuscripts that they have, there were words that didn't translate from Hebrew, Aramaic, some Latin in the Old Testament, and then there were some words in Greek in the New Testament that did not translate from one language to another. Just as words we have now, there are words, in my experience as a minister, I would do foreign weddings, and there were words that did not translate to their language or to their culture. So then they used the best word that they could. I looked at the word savor, and the first word that I saw was euodia, Greek word euodia, and it means tasteless, or taste, or I should say, or fragrance, if you will. So there are two scriptures, and I believe it is 1 Corinthians chapter 2, I'm pretty sure of, and Ephesians, where it talks about a sweet smelling savor or savor, which is fragrant or smell. Here, though, it didn't make sense because there's a word there that it's his savor. That changed the whole context of the text. And so I began to dig a little deeper. Instead of taking the first meaning of the word, I dug a little deeper and found out that the word here is mo-rah-ee-no. Mo-rah-ee-no means useless. Ha! Now we're talking. We're talking because we get the word mo-rah-ee-no. We have the word mo-rah-ee-no in Greek, but we get the word morose. Morose means still, useless, no good, quiet. When a person is morose, that's what we use. The thing is, now I understand the text, because he's saying you are the salt of the earth, and if the salt has lost its usefulness, well, what does he mean, usefulness? In that day, as in this one, the main use of salt was as a preservative. If you look at your labels on food, whether it's dry or wet, you'll see the sodium content is in just about everything. And there are some things that have no salt, but sodium is a preservative. It preserves frozen food. It preserves canned food. It's always used as a preservative. Cultures were built back then and far before Jesus' time on salt. They could build a city because they could preserve their food using the salt. It would dry out the food, and it could be cooked or rehydrated almost. Not almost, but it could be rehydrated again if they had enough salt. So salt was very valuable. It became so valuable that it was actually traded as money. It was shipped across the seas as early as 8800 BC and up until about 6600, 6000 BC, cultures were built in various parts of the world simply on salt. Salt is in everything. Salt is in the ground. We can harvest salt from the seas. So salt was absolutely everywhere, and it could be used, and so its value was very high. So Jesus is saying to us, very simply, if you have lost your usefulness, what good are you? You are the salt of the earth. If the salt loses it, Don't lose your usefulness. It's very, very valuable. You are very, very valuable. You are valuable as God's commodity. You are his hands. You are his eyes. You are the one who has been put in the garden to do the work that needs to be done. And never, ever let anyone believe, no matter how you came into this world, whether the circumstances were not that great, or whether, you had an ugly childhood, or whether you had an ugly marriage, or whether, ugly things happened in your life, you must know that if you're here, you have purpose. And if you're in him, you are not useless. You are not useless. Never let anyone tell you that you are useless and you aren't worth anything, because if you're in him, you don't want to become useless. Well, Pastor, how do you become useless? Stop using your gift. Don't do what God told you to do. Meld in with the other people in the world and say, let them convince you that you aren't worthless, and you should just settle down and not think about starting that business. You should just take it easy, go out to get a job, retire, live on a pension, when God has told you to start a business or start a ministry, and God has told you to do this or do the other thing, and you're just saying, well, no, that's not the way it goes. You're useless because you want to remain useful. Be useful, no matter how old you are. Be useful. The scripture says that the older women should teach the younger women. The scripture says that the gray hair is a crown of glory if it be found in the way of righteousness. The scripture talks about fathers and instructors. Those people are people that have experienced things and that have done things, and that's their usefulness. You are useful. Don't lose your usefulness, or else, the rest of the scripture says, you're going to be tossed out and trodden underfoot. Now, let me explain that. In Judges chapter 9, there's an interesting text. Abimelech, who was Gideon's illegitimate son. The scripture changed his name to, I think, Jerubbaal or something like that. Abimelech attacks Shechem. And he attacked Shechem, and later on in chapter 9 of Judges, it says he took the city, destroyed the city, and then he sowed it with salt. What's interesting about that is history shows that he covered the ground with salt. The entire city, just covered the entire city, and the outskirts of the city, covered it with salt. What did that do? It killed all the vegetation, so they couldn't grow anything. They couldn't grow vegetables. That the ground was no good. And if land is no good, who sows into it? What can you grow? You can't grow anything. What good is the land? You're not gonna build houses on it. You're not gonna do anything. So trodden underfoot meant, in those days, there were salt roads. And again, the reason I mentioned Abimelech was because they would make salt roads. They would put salt on the road, and it would clear all the vegetation so that there would be a clear path from one place to another. And what they did with the excess salt that was no good, they would just toss it out there on that same road. It's just salt anyway, so it's no good. So we'll toss it out on the salt road where there's already salt being trodden underfoot. That's the thing that we need to understand. Don't be useless. Don't go out there and do nothing with your gift. You're like the guy with the one talent. He just took it and he hid it in the ground, knowing that his master reaped where he did not sow, and he produced where he wasn't supposed to produce, but he still went and hid that talent in the ground. So what you need to do is always do something with your gift. Yeah, I don't know. Yes, it's scary. Yes, there are other things going on, but still, you got to make sure that you're doing something with what you've been given. Continue to work it. Continue to do what you do. Continue to walk the walk, work the work of him while it is day, and you'll be just fine. You understand? So don't lose your savor. Don't lose your usefulness. Don't lose your mo-rah-ee-no. Mo-rah-ee-no. Okay. Hold on. God's going to do it for you. Okay. It's Pastor KJ. I'll talk to you. Bless you.